This is okay. That's it. That's the key. This is the important thing. The human beings are obligate tribal.
Okay.
So we are part of something.
Yes.
And so if we're not part of something, we are adrift.
Yes.
And what's happening is that as you exit, as you take the red pill, as you exit the tradition that is not working, you now are adrift. And to the degree to which you're able to find something that you can be part of that is itself has at least the ingredients to be adaptive. It may actually not initially be adaptive, but it has the capacity, it has the scope and competence to actually be able to start making effective choices in the context of what's happening. You will naturally begin to upgrade it in that direction. Mm-hmm. So, okay, how's that show up? I had like, all right, sure, check it out. Where was this? Something happened somewhere where there was a crisis. There was a town. And in the town, you had a political structure. And, it was during Katrina. So Mississippi, Katrina.
Right.
The hurricane hits, the levees are breaking, and the existing political structure just drops the ball.
Right.
And what happens is this. One guy who's like the guy who runs the general store has his shit together. And he starts to coordinate effective choices. We're talking about local, small scale effective choices. But that creates an attractor. And other people who witness that attractor, they're like looking and they're seeing chaos in all directions. And they see one spot over there that is not chaos in all directions. And they begin to orient themselves towards that. And so he says, okay, well, you do this. And they start doing that. And as it turns out, that doesn't suck. It works a little bit. And by the way, them working with him, it works better. So then the zone of coordinated action, the zone of order, the zone of non-chaos begins to grow organically, because we were that obligate tribalism is that if we don't as individuals lose our capacity as individuals to see and orient towards what is truly effective choice in our context, as long as we have that capacity, which is our natural human ability, and then we have the capacity to orient ourselves to it in a flexible way so that we can upgradient its capacity, then you get a positive feedback loop in the environment that you're in, right? So it's that liminal shamanic, we're dealing with chaos all the time, really. And so let's actually use that skill set to recohere something that is leaps all the way, crosses the chasm, does the valley crossing into something that works.
Right.
Yeah, this feels like this is a little bit of a prophecy. I think what we're about to witness is that. I think what we're about to witness in the West is a generalized failure of traditions, institutional structures, leadership as it currently exists, for reasons both of corruption and ontological, epistemological inadequacy.
Right.
And the movement towards the collective intelligence, the movement towards distributed intelligence, cognition, finding those individuals and groups that are actually able to make increasingly effective choices in the context of what's really happening, and then learning how to recohere and re-coordinate with those groups so that they're able to scale and increase their effectiveness, I would say is, if not this time, and I think this time is a good opportunity, like it's a good trial run, and it may be the one where that happens. If not this time, it will be sort of in the next few times of this, this increase in delta E. But so as a human, go ahead.
But there is a problem I see in that. I mean, not your prophecy. I think your prophecy is accurate. What I meant is, because now I'm thinking again of our other example, the Weimar Republic. You get a group of individuals who are locally very effective, but it turns out that the global solution that they're proposing is actually, it ends up destroying Germany, right? It actually turns out to be massively self-destructive.
Yeah,
So you clearly have individuals that are on the street, right, and in the marketplace of Germany, like they're creating that attractor of order. That's why they succeed, right? But what they do is that particular configuration, the dynamical system they engendered. I mean, this is kind of a version of the tragedy of the commons, right? It's locally order generating, but it's in the service of a psychotic conspiracy theory that ultimately puts the whole country on a path of self-destruction.
Yeah, I think what we're going to see is we're going to see something like 1 million Nazi parties.
Oh,
right? And I think we're going to see is just lots and lots and lots of micro-psychotic cabals.
yes. Yeah.
And the question is going to be, how do they relate to each other?
Yeah.
Because the level of systemic breakdown is the default state is failure.
Yeah.
So it's not like we need Nazis to fail. It's more like we need something. We need sort of the opposite of Nazis to succeed, and the default state is failure.
Right.
So what does that look like? Well, it looks a little bit like what Peter, Culture War 2.0.
Yeah.
But multiplied
Peter
by,
Limbaugh.
multiplied by a factor of probably 5 orders of magnitude. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So my concern there is then you get general systems collapse, because if you get this proliferation of balls, your internal social environment becomes as complex and unmanageable as the external environment you're trying to respond to.
Wow. You know, it's interesting. In this case, like something like a virus, and here specifically nature, maybe our saving grace. Because if the complexity is happening higher in the human social stack, so politics, finance, it's like sociology, things like identity and memetics, culture, those are so easily, how do I say this? They're so amenable to psychosis. As long as I can tell a locally effective story that kind of makes me feel like I'm making sense of my environment, I can kind of go forward until I bump into something. Nature doesn't give a fuck. Right? If my story is that, it's funny. I think it just happened actually in Iran. A cleric, went to go administer some people who've got the virus, and he didn't take any precautions because his model was that he would be protected, and he got sick and he died. Nature doesn't care what your psychotic story is. Like that's rock bottom. So that's psychotic break. It hits rock bottom. And so, not being sick or not dying from sickness is like that's it. Wow. I've forgotten about that. That's the key. Like the checksum of this whole story is nature. And at the end of the day, we're all running psychotic narratives. The question is, are they adaptive psychotic narratives or not?
Right.
So the more the crises that we run into are non-sociological crises, but in fact actual natural crises that are visceral. So climate change, unfortunately, until it is so intense that it's irrelevant, is not visceral. Right? You kind of everything you're seeing is mediated by a very large interpretive distance, and so you can always run a narrative in between those 2 points, and avoid rock bottom. Until rock bottom hits you in the face with something that you can't avoid no matter what. There was something like getting sick and dying from a virus that's growing very rapidly. If you take a look at it, every one of these micro cabals of psychotics, they're going to get sick if this is real. Like if this is a real thing. Or more specifically, their local adaptiveness will be somewhat obviously less than others. Now, what you're about to say, I think, it certainly popped into my mind, is that hardcore prepper communities are going to be indistinguishable from groups that are actually making effective choices in a larger context. Like there's a whole bunch of nodes. There's a whole bunch of solutions to this particular event that are probably equivalent in terms of their adaptiveness. Unless the event's really big, right? And so it's weird. Like it's one of these things where I'm noticing as I'm talking, like, wow, it would actually maybe be best for us if this is a bigger thing than it seems like it might be, because it would be enough felt reality that it would push our consciousness past certain black holes that we're in right now.
So more like the Bronze Age collapse.
Yeah.
Which opens up radical, right? You do get this speciation of all these new, cultural, economic, political forms of organization, and cognition changes fundamentally.
Yeah, and in fact, if you think about it, like if you think, okay, so we can go up. You can say the Chinese went through that kind of dynamic 7 times. Like every dynasty has gone through a collapse that was on the order of like 2/3 mortality.
Right.
and a couple hundred years of chaos. And then that gave rise to the next dynasty. And it's funny because the continuity of China, which is different than the discontinuity of the Bronze Age, I think is precisely that order of magnitude. So, if you've gone from 60% to 75% or something like that, you probably have no longer China to China. You have something which is, the Hittites to the Greeks. And then so then you've got like the Bronze Age collapse, the Chinese collapse, the Roman collapse, and then like the Black Plague, something like that. Where the Black Plague, awful as it was, didn't really interrupt the continuity of the West. It created a real, the thing that came out the other end was very, very different. But I would say in deeply fundamentally was still thought of itself as the West, at least.
Yeah. There's a certain continuity of identity back beyond it. Yes, I get that.
So if you do the map all the way back down to the individual, so if you've got somebody who's got delusion or addiction, there's how hard do you have to hit rock bottom to have your moment of clarity, and that's the question. And ideally, you don't have to hit too hard. Right? The softer you can hit, it's the moment of clarity you're looking for. It's not the rock bottom you're looking for. And I guess that's the question: is how hard do we have to hit rock bottom to have a moment of clarity adequate to the amount of change that we need to make in our interior and our exterior to be truly adaptive to the context that we're finding ourselves in?
That's a good question.